If you work for the Catholic Church and want to avoid burnout, overcome team dysfunctions, and put more souls in the pews, we are here to help. I'm John Kahns, and this is the Catholic Ministry Professionals Podcast, the show that provides leadership development for Catholic churches. Each week, you can expect engaging discussions, expert interviews, and actionable advice to help you move Jesus' mission forward in your parish. Today, we're having a conversation with a real, live Catholic ministry professional. Kara Kardell, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, John. You were right before we hopped on. You're like, feel free to bob your head to the intro. And I kind of wanted to, but then I was like self-conscious about it. So I didn't. I was like, oh, yeah, that's nice.
It gets you a little bit. That's
It
the best that
does.
GarageBand has to offer and my skill level. That's it. That's
Oh, I
where
love
it
that.
peaks. Awesome. As I was introducing you, as I was saying your name, I had that brief moment where I realized, I never asked her how to pronounce her last name. Did I
No,
get that right?
Yeah, Kardell. Yep. You said
Yes. All right. So far, all success. I love it.
it. Yeah.
Well, Kara, I know a little bit about you. I know what you're up to, but for the benefit of our listeners, please let me get out of the way and just tell them a little bit about yourself and the ministry that you do.
Oh, sure. So I hate doing biography things. I feel like whenever I just list stuff about myself, it's so boring. So hopefully people are actually interested in the things that I'm going to tell you about myself.
You're not boring. Go for it.
Okay. Okay. So I am married. I've been married to my wonderful husband, BJ, for 7 years. And we have 3 kiddos, and we live in Iowa, Sioux City. So pretty close to where you guys are at, John. I would say that, my work in ministry, it started, my desire for it really started in college. I fell in love with God in high school, but like the radical, I want to work for God, I want to do something for God came in college. And I didn't know what. I just knew, like, I think God's calling me to something for him, and I didn't know what it was yet. So I went to, I think it was a Methodist liberal arts college in my undergrad. And so when I started trying to take some religious studies classes, I realized very quickly, like, this is not what I want to learn. This is not really hitting the spot for me. So I switched. So I have a bachelor's degree in business and then a bachelor's degree in communications. But through that college, I met some really wonderful people. And so I got the opportunity to do ministry in the summer at college. And I probably would attribute that summer to like what really changed my approach to faith. I think I just was so set in the like relational high of a prayer life with Jesus. And so my highs were really high, but my lows were rough, and I didn't have something that was rooted in. And so through getting to do this ministry in the summer, I had one of the best teammates I could have possibly asked for. God had a plan in that for sure. And she would like stay up late with me and teach me things about the faith. Like, this is why we believe, this thing and this thing. And so she was studying that. And that's what I wanted to be studying, but I wasn't studying that yet. And so I think she really had this huge impact on me. Um, she was younger actually too. So even I look back on that, like, this is so off topic, but I look back on that and I'm like, she was really the first person who ministered to me in such a transformative way. And she probably didn't even know she was doing it, but it really changed me. And so then I got asked to be a youth minister. And so I was a part-time youth minister for 2 years. And I think my supervisor and then her boss really saw that, okay, part-time is not what you're after. And so they encouraged me to apply for a job at the diocese. And so I started diocesan ministry as the assistant director of youth and young adult ministry, and then switched to director of discipleship after a couple years. So I worked in diocesan ministry for almost 7 years, was approaching 7 years when I decided to leave. So it was actually in diocesan ministry that I met my friend. He was my coworker, and then we became very good friends. Fred, who I know you guys interviewed on the show, Fred Schellebarger. And we both really felt called by God to a different form of ministry. And it was a little bit uncertain, like, okay, what is this ministry actually going to be? But we knew it was something. And so it was about 3 years of discerning and letting God kind of work. And how, I don't know, it's weird how he works with me. I don't know how he works with you or everybody, but he works with me by either giving me like an image to pray with or just like a couple words. And so it was like the first year of discernment was not yet, just 2 words. And so we're like, okay. So it was like discerning the call, but knowing it wasn't quite time. And then the next year was sooner than you think. And like, I hate that word, soon. And you're like, what does that actually mean? And then the third year was, okay, it's time. And I feel like I very much pushed off the it's time. I'm like, that's nice. I think I'm gonna sit in my comfortable boat for a while. And then it was like the imagery of the scripture passage where Jesus is walking on water and the disciples are in the boat and he calls Peter out. And it was when it was time for like handing in my notice. I was like, okay, God, yes, it's time. I just kept seeing that image, but I was in the boat and I had like 1 foot up. Like I was ready to step out, but I wasn't moving. And then Jesus was on the shore already. He was like, I've been in the water waiting for you for a long time. Like, I'm over here. You can come on over here when you're ready. So he was very
I thought you were gonna say he's in the boat ready to push you out.
he's like, you know what? I've given you some.
Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt. Go ahead.
No, that was good. So he was very patient, but I think that was like really it was a push because I was like, he's been waiting for us this whole time. And so like it really was like with every step down the hallway to go hand in my notice, it was like it felt like a step finally out of the boat and just fully trusting in God. So we left, I think it was the end of 2022. And so now we do podcast ministry, we do music ministry, consulting with parishes, but a lot of it is retreats and speaking things. Um, but the ultimate goal is, and things are moving forward with that. The ultimate goal is like we want a center of formation. We want a campus where it would be residential for people who just want to come and live radical holiness and learn more about their faith, to grow in their spiritual life with God, to grow just as human beings in friendship and in work life balance, in spiritual direction and counseling, things like that. Um, and also we want to form people on like the practical. Okay, you want to live out your faith. You want to actually go and do the Great Commission that's talked about in Matthew 28. Here are tips of how to do that, and then giving people opportunities to go and do that. So we're in the process now of becoming a nonprofit, and we have a pretty big promise of a donation that is going to move things forward very quickly with that. So things are moving, and God, it's not always easy. I feel like, sorry, I've been talking a long time about myself. This is weird.
That's good.
I feel like it's like the imagery of Israel in the desert, where they're like looking at the promised land, and then they wander for 40 years because they doubted. And so like you can have the promised land right in front of you. You can have what God has said or called you to right in front of you. But like sometimes there's hardships, and sometimes it's like, okay, am I trusting in myself? Am I trusting in God? And like I've had that fear where it's like, God, I don't want to mess it up and then wander for 40 years and like not get to where you're calling us. And so it definitely hasn't been easy. There's been a lot of discernment. But he's been good. He hasn't let us sink in any way. So that's kind of where I am at. And when I say we, I talk about Fred because we're in the ministry together, but that's kind of where we're at. But yeah, it's been good. He's got us.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that image, and thank you for sharing that of not yet, the discernment,
Mhm.
right? Not yet.
Yeah.
Sooner than you think, and then go, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I what I love about that actually to me reminds me of the Israelites, right? So much of what they were doing was learning to worship. And a
Mhm.
big part of that is they watched the pillar of fire or the pillar of cloud. If the pillar of fire was there, the discernment was, all right, well, wait.
Yeah.
When God moved, then they moved, right?
Yeah.
And just that beautiful. We talk all the time about the need to discern what God is calling you to do. And so many times people take that discernment to mean just wait until like a lightning bolt from heaven comes down and writes on a tablet which direction to
Yep.
go.
Yep.
But to wait is actually a discernment, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you you almost got to kind of take some steps. You got to make some moves to start feeling out where is God calling us here. So even to wait is a discernment. It's not necessarily the default in my mind.
Yeah.
That there's a reality that waiting is an active waiting, right? Like Abraham at
Yeah.
the front of the tent, waiting for God to arrive, not resting, not sleeping until God shakes you awake, but waiting for that moment is an
Yeah.
active thing.
And the apostles in the upper room, it reminds me, I think it's the end of Luke, where it's the very last chapter and he says, wait. And then like Luke picks up writing in Acts. And it's like, wait for what? Wait for the promise of the Father, which is the Holy Spirit. So it's like, we're not just stressing out in the upper room. There's a purpose in the waiting, and he's giving you himself in that gift. And that's, I 100% agree. I think sometimes like, yes, there is this like prayerful waiting of discernment, and there's an act. So both should be active, not passive. Like you have to make a choice and you have to discern prayerfully in the waiting, but both are active.
Absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. I do want to talk a little bit because you said you spent 7 years at the diocesan level, and now
Yeah.
you're doing ministry throughout the diocese and outside of the diocese. So you have a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom to share just from your time in that role, in those
Yeah.
roles. And I'd love to pick apart just a little bit. One of the big impetusi for this podcast is this fact that there's an unspoken reality, right? And when I mean unspoken, it's everybody talks about it behind the doors, but whenever there's real meetings or real opportunities to bring things up, everybody's quiet.
Yeah.
But there's a
Yep.
lot of frustration that people who work in the church, that Catholic ministry professionals experience on the day to day, and some of them are unique to the church world. Some of them, I think frustration's not unique to the work world anyway. But
Yeah.
we really like to talk into those areas of frustration that often can have simple solutions. That often, just like when we bring things into light, then the devil can't play with them. What
Hmm.
are some of the things, or an area of where you see a lot of Catholic ministry professionals getting frustrated in their work, and do you have any ideas of things that are needed to solve
Yeah.
those?
So two things kind of come to mind, and I feel like there's actually quite a bit that people can get really frustrated with. That was one thing where it felt like maybe 40% of my job in diocesan ministry was just traveling and going and having coffee with people, like some of our DREs and catechists, because they were and priests, honestly, because they were so discouraged by things that were going on and that things that they couldn't change. And so I feel like one of those things is really like we want everything to be fixed so quickly. And not saying that this is like the cause of frustration, but I think it might be an underlying thing because so many people who work in ministry are so passionate about what they're doing. And so, like, naturally, if you're passionate about something, you want to like put everything into it and you want to get some stuff done. And unfortunately, the church world is very slow in getting stuff done. And I wish that were not the case. But I feel like sometimes, and I get this way too, we started actually that was a good way to start then with the waiting. Like I struggle with waiting. It's like if I have an idea, especially if I feel like this has been given by God and like he wants us moving forward with this, I'm like, why are we not doing this right now? And why is this not happening? So I feel like sometimes it's very easy to get frustrated if renewal or ideas are not just taking off rapidly. um, I have this prayer that's printed off on my refrigerator, and it's called Trusting in the Slow Work of God. And there's a line in there that says, above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the immediate stages. That's 100% me. Give our Lord the benefit of believing that his hand is leading you and accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete. Like that's like the epitome of actually what I feel when I'm in suspense and incomplete is just like anxiety. I'm like, I feel like there's something missing. Why is this not happening? Like that's not our natural state to be just in suspense and incomplete in our work, especially in our work, because we want things to move forward. And so I feel like um, I mean, I guess a practical like, okay, getting over that is really like the prayer is the patience. We don't have patience apart from God. We need him to give us that patience, but God, how do you want to renew my parish? How do you want to renew my program? What are you trying to do? Because maybe in our just glorious and brilliant plan, God's like, wait a second, that's actually not what's needed right now. And I have a friend who's a DRE, and she actually kind of realized this. Like, she wanted to bring a really well-known program to her parish and was very excited about it. And then after a lot of discernment, she was like, I don't think our parish is ready for this yet. And so instead, she backtracked and was like, okay, what can we do over the next year to get people ready to just be on board with this program? And I don't think that's like our natural thing to do. Is like, no, I want this program and it's going to succeed and we're going to do it. I feel like that's usually, and like, then that's where the frustration comes. It's like, wait, let's try and lay the groundwork and get people going on this. So that's one thing, is just like, there's so much passion, and so we want it to be done, but we really have to trust that God's moving in the slow. Um, the second thing I think, which is maybe more like practical frustration, and I fully understand why people would get frustrated. I don't think that, even though the church's mission is to evangelize, I don't think the budget of many churches reflects that the mission is to evangelize. I feel like I have seen so many parishes where the DRE, or the faith formation leader, is the only staff in charge of, quote, evangelizing everyone in that parish. I've even seen it where, like, they're in charge of adult formation, they're in charge of youth formation. Some have been in charge of doing the priest's laundry. And so, like, you just have, isn't that ridiculous? Isn't that ridiculous? I'm like,
I,
no, you set
I'd
some
say
boundaries,
no.
honey. No, like, there's a line.
Oh
But
man.
that,
Hey, DRE, if you are listening to this podcast, give me a call. I'd like to walk you through that conversation with your
yeah,
pastor.
seriously, seriously.
Oh yeah, professional boundaries. There's got to
Yeah.
be a line somewhere. Okay, anyways,
Yeah.
go
But like
on.
that, I mean, but that can be a cause of frustration. Like, yes, that one's an outrageous example, but even just like, you experience so much burnout because you're the one who's given every single job, and it just feels like the weight is on your shoulders. And I think even with that, like, so many people who work in ministry who have all of these responsibilities don't always feel valued in the things that they do and in their responsibilities. And I think that is a very justified reason to be frustrated, because people like to be valued, people like to be appreciated. And I think renewing the parish takes an entire village. So I think it's unfair for someone to set aside, $20,000, we're going to hire one person, and all of a sudden magically our church is going to be different. That's unrealistic. And it's an expectation that shouldn't be placed on one person. So that's kind of where I would say, and maybe a change in that is for the leadership of parishes, or the leadership in higher roles in dioceses, to really like offer financial support and place an emphasis. If we want to transform our parish, if we want to bring Jesus into people's lives and focus on evangelization, your your budget should be the mission statement of your parish. Not literally, but it should reflect what you guys are aiming for. So maybe take a step to look at that.
I something about that rings really true to me because we call the podcast the Catholic Ministry Professionals Podcast, and that was very intentional because so many people that work for the church don't actually take their own jobs seriously. They don't think it's a professional job. It's and in some ways, maybe 15, 20 years ago, that was the case where the pastor just kind of hunted someone down. The most willing volunteer became the
Yeah.
worker. So they
Yeah.
weren't trained.
I think that's true
But
still in some parishes today.
oh, a lot of times, yeah, and
Yeah.
even for me, coming out of college with a theology degree, minors in philosophy and business administration, like a real degree, a college degree, and I
Yeah.
come in and I'm working in campus ministry in a high school, and the running joke was, "You don't really do anything all day anyway," and
Oh,
it
yeah.
in good
Mm.
fun, but also they said it because they really didn't see what I did every day. It's not as concrete as teaching. Teaching's very
Mhm.
concrete. I had 120 students come through my doors today. I covered X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
And I can point to fruit that's happening, but kind of to your point before, like that fruit isn't the things I'm doing today are so that hopefully a year from now, 2 years from now, 6 months from now, there will be fruit,
Yeah.
right? I don't think it's an accident that Jesus used agriculture in so many ways to to explain how the kingdom takes root and builds fruit.
Yeah.
Because if you look at grapes, right? I got to sit next to uh, a winemaker, right, a vineyard
Mhm.
owner,
Mhm.
and learned so much about winemaking. But the thing that blew my mind is that when they plant grapevines, it's a 3-year process, a 3-year wait before that vine is ready to produce fruit that's worthy of wine.
Oh,
Right?
wow.
So it's 3 years. So you plant a grapevine today, right? You quit your job and you buy a vineyard and you start planting fresh vines. You're 3 years away from making your first profit off of those
Yeah.
grapes,
Yeah.
right? So getting your first fruits that are really ready for wine. So I mean, it's just it takes time to build all that. But also because of that, it's hard to concretely say this is a professional job with these professional outcomes. But also because of that, if you want to see that reflected in um, your budget and the things that you're doing, you have to find ways of sharing that with people, right?
Yeah.
Sharing the vision, helping them to understand the fruit. And I do think a part of that is ourselves taking these jobs, these roles very seriously. Not
Mhm.
not just in the sense of like there are souls at stake, but also the sense of in the world, are we doing things that are we making moves, right? Are we planning in a way or being intentional and strategic about the way that we build the kingdom that
Right.
is deserving of the professional role that you are in? And so I think sometimes we do need to take ourselves seriously enough to say, I don't have time to do your laundry, Father,
Yeah, right?
because I'm actually trying to do X, Y, and Z. You know,
Yeah.
I'm trying to
Yeah.
accomplish these objectives, and that takes a huge chunk away from me. So
It does. I think also just, like, trusting that, what you are aiming for in your ministry, not everyone's gonna see the good. Not everyone's gonna value what you're doing. But if you love what you're doing and if you value what you're doing, like, that's what matters. And you might not even see the direct fruit. There's a passage, so I like when I'm in adoration, I like reading something from scripture, and there was one time I was in adoration, I was like, "Okay, God, bring a scripture passage to my mind that you want me to go and pray with." And I heard the woman at the well, and I was like, "No, I already know that one. Give me a different passage." And
classic.
then, yeah, a classic. I was like, "Okay, fine." So I went and I read through the whole passage, and then at the very end, after the woman already runs back to the town, at the very end, Jesus says to his apostles, "One will sow, another will reap." And I just stared at those words because I was very much in a place in my ministry where I'm like, am I even making a difference? Because you don't immediately see fruit. And I just stared at those, one will sow. And I was like, okay, I'm sowing and I might never reap. I might never see the harvest or the fruit, but I have to trust that it's there. And I like that. And I like what you said about you plant the grapes and you don't see fruit for 3 years because that's like the apostles. It's like Jesus entered his ministry at 30 and died at 33. They walked with him for 3 years. So it's like they were planted and they are growing and they aren't going to produce that fruit for many years. And I think that's a beautiful example of, yeah, just the patience and the work that God is doing even when we don't see it or others don't see it.
Yeah, and I need to be honest about the practical what that practically means in your ministry, particularly if you're focused on youth ministry, you experience this in a real way. And you just have to be honest with yourself about it. If you are investing mainly in teens, in 3 or 4 years, those teens move on to college
Yeah.
and probably out of your town. And then you've got a fresh start that has to happen at least every 4 years, should happen probably every year where you're making that intentional effort. But that
Mhm.
that can be the real frustrating thing too, is you get this solid group of freshmen that for whatever reason they're dialed in and you get them to senior year and all of a sudden they're gone. And the
Yeah.
next couple of years there's less. You have to be mentally and emotionally prepared for that. Which can be a part of that frustration that we feel when we
Yeah.
don't feel like we're bearing fruit, to just have that really practical lens on set that's gonna be the rhythm.
Yeah.
I also argue too that that's a big reason why we need to have a strong focus on investing in the parents of those
Mhm.
kids, so that that can, continue to bear fruit after the kids cycle out. How are we continuing to work with the adults that are the static, dynamic members of the parish community that will continue after the kids graduate? So I
Yeah.
think those things can kind of play in there a lot as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So next question, just to kind of break open, what tools you think that every parish should have in their tool belt for ministry in the 21st century? And I think I love that you're a communications person as well, because you probably have seen some tools develop. You've seen a lot of what to do and what not to do, best practices, all that jazz. But what are some tools that you think every parish needs to have for ministry in the 21st century?
So I feel like I'm taking a very unorthodox approach to this question, because my tools are not like tangible physical tools and resources. I'm like, this is just like the things that you need to be successful in your parish. So like one of them, for example, I feel like you need a team that is cohesive and supports you. So that's not like a necessarily a tangible thing, but it's this idea that hopefully can come to life, because I have found that if it's just one person, or if it's, a couple people, but the priest doesn't support this or back it up, or your supervisor doesn't support your what you are trying to do in your mission, or maybe there's something that is like undermining it, it just all kind of crumbles. And so I would say, like, as a parish, if you are trying to accomplish something, you all need to be on the same page. And so one thing, I guess, in a tangible, practical way to do that, I always feel like if there's this like renewal effort that you guys are aiming for, I think it's always beneficial to get everyone on the same page. And I think a book is really good with that. So like we had a kind of an effort that was very similar to this in my ministry. And we all read Divine Renovation. And then we sat and talked about divine renovation. And actually, how the meeting started was a half hour of adoration. And we would come already having read the material. Then we would discuss the material. And then we would discuss, okay, now what from this could we potentially apply to the ministry that we're doing? And so I think, like, if you have something that you guys can all get on the same page on, even if it's something spiritual, like, we have people who are working here who are just here to check a box of a job, but they don't have a relationship with the Lord, or might not be Catholic. Like, if you want to bring in a spiritual book, I Believe in Love, it's a personal retreat with Saint Therese, is a beautiful, beautiful book. It brings in the teachings of the church, but also the teachings of Saint Therese. And I would say that's probably one of the books that absolutely changed my heart. So I would say, like, a good solid team, and maybe a book study with that team, that is intentional in transforming where you guys are at, and to make sure you're on the same page, because you really do. You need the support of everybody. You can't do it alone. Too often, I think we try and do it alone. Oh, Imitation of Christ is a really good book too, but that's probably more for like individual personal prayer, but very good. Like, okay, I'm not going to hop on a soapbox, but here's what I'm going to say about that. Like, if you love a book and there's a spiritual book that changed your life, like, kick out the weird book stands in the back of your church that aren't really doing a whole lot for people, but they're cheap, and bring in some actual good. Get out of here, John. Here's a soapbox you put on there.
Sorry.
Like I know there are seasons where people can go pick up a book for free in the back because they're a couple nickels to bring in a bunch of books. Like, no, just get some good solid ones that are going to actually help your parishioners. Anyway, okay, soapbox over. You can take that down.
Ty has a button because he would get on his soapbox. He says it all the time. I'm going to get on my soapbox here. So we have a button for him too.
I love it. I have a couple soapbox moments.
I know. I'm with you though, because I don't have anything personally against Matthew Kelly.
Yeah.
But I personally feel like if you've read one or two of his books, you've pretty much read them all, right? He just kind of, and he does a good job with some of that introductory stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if they're in your doors and they're showing up regularly to the point where they're going to pick up a book, they've done the introductory thing in some level, right? Give them some meat. Give them some meat to chew on. That's what St. Paul, right? Two times over, he says, either you're not ready for solid food and you should be, or you weren't ready then, but now you need to be ready. I mean, when you're a baby, when you're an infant in the faith, I give you milk. Now you're adults, you should be eating solid food. And then that's either a moment for chastisement or calling forward, right? So give them some solid meat to chew on. And maybe they're not ready, but then that's where you have the conversation when people come up to you and go, this was stupid. Why did we do this? Okay, we'll have that conversation with them and say, here's the beautiful thing. Here's the beautiful thing that we've got. Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Give them some real meat.
100%. I think anything in ministry, like if you're a parish and you're offering things, it should be like, I don't know if Fred mentioned this, but it should be like you're looking at a menu. Like, there's something, if you're vegan, if you're gluten-free, if you're like a meat lover, whatever, there's something for everybody. That should be like what you're offering. I think the same goes if you're really a parish that's like, we need to offer resources and books and things. It should be the same thing. So I think there is a place for Matthew Kelly. My dad one time, he has his bathroom readings. Oh my gosh, he's gonna kill me for saying that.
That's all
Uh,
is it Reader's Digest? Is that
yeah, right. No, he brought me into the bathroom to like show me. He's like, "Here, come look at this book," and it was Rediscovering Catholicism by Matthew Kelly. He was so excited about it.
Mhm.
And then like a year and a half, 2 years later, I went into the bathroom and I saw on his bathroom bookshelf Rome Sweet Home by Scott Hahn, St. Teresa's prayer meditation. And so like that's the process of it. It's not just like hang out in the introductory. It's no, you've been fed, now keep like you got to keep, you know, your palate needs some more. It needs some good stuff.
You know what I love about this, and I think needs to become a thing,
Yeah.
is that your dad is modeling that at home. Because anybody who's at that house for any amount of time is probably gonna need to use that bathroom, and now
Yep.
right there's a book for everybody at every stage of the
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah. Seriously.
And all he's gotta do is be friends with them and see them regularly enough that they can pick up the next chapter
Yeah.
when they come back.
They're like, "I wanna come to your house because I'm on chapter
There
3 of your toilet reading."
there's a ministry niche there that I think that maybe Draw Near should pick up on.
Yeah, seriously. We got it. We'll
Bring
do it.
bring him in, put him on the podcast, have that conversation.
That'll be the like totality of the conversation.
Awesome, awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, let me ask you this. How do you
Yeah.
balance, right? And this I think this dovetails nicely from what we're talking about, but how do you balance the spiritual side of ministry with the practical side? Kind of that classic question, right? That classic thought.
Yeah.
It's not about the numbers, but also it's got to be a little bit about the numbers. Like the numbers matter. So, how do you balance the
Yeah.
spiritual and practical sides of ministry?
Yeah, so this even goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. I really like Fred actually probably already said this on here because we kind of you work together long enough, you start adopting some of the same things. We always say the spiritual is the practical. And so I struggle with like the word balance because I don't think it should be a balance. I feel like then it implies like 50-50 spiritual practical. And I feel like it should be like 90-10 spiritual practical, 90% spiritual, 90% relying on God. Because then otherwise, it's like we start relying so much more on ourselves as if like, okay, I work for God and I work for the church. Now my prayer life is going to be over here because that's the spiritual. And they start becoming separate. But I personally, and maybe this is controversial because some people would say they should be separate. I don't think they should be separate. I feel like the things that you experience in your prayer and your relationship with God and the things that you're learning, like that helps you grow into more of your identity as a son or daughter of God. And then that should feed into your ministry. And so I think it should be like 90% spiritual, 10% practical. I really, oh man, here's my soapbox again. You can put the button up, okay?
Ah, yeah, I'm gonna let me get that for you.
Uh, so I actually, maybe I imagine that you and I might think similarly on this. So I want you to like challenge me if you don't. I actually would say that it should never be about the numbers. I think that like it's really hard in a world where like church ministry has become more of a profession and less of a vocation, because when we look at it from this like professional business world, it's like you need tangible outcomes. You need to know how many people went to confession, how many registrations came in, how much money did you make from this event, like how many catechists and volunteers do you have this year who are going to serve? Like it kind of, I'm not going to say brainwashes us, but it kind of changes our perspective a little bit that like, okay, now I do need to focus on the numbers. I do need to be able to like justify my job or quantify my job. And I don't think that ministry is quantifiable, because I would rather meet one person and have an encounter with them and a conversation with them that changes their life forever than have 1,000 kids come to my first youth group. I think it's focusing really on the quality of what God is doing in the ministry than it is quantity. So when I say, I guess I don't think it should be about numbers. I guess like I would ask, maybe people are like, no, it has to be about the numbers, or what about this? I kind of would want to pose another question, maybe for just like someone's own heart to reflect on. And that would be, how many people are too few of people for you to show up? How many people are too few people for you to want to go minister to that particular thing? And not you, obviously, John, just like collectively, the person listening. How many is too few? I once saw an email about an event that was happening, and I won't say where, just for anonymity, but it was an event that was happening, and the email said, "We're going to cancel the event because we didn't meet our minimum requirement for registrations." And immediately, like if I had registered for that event, immediately I would be like, okay, I'm probably never going to register to attend an event put on this place again or by this person again, because now immediately I feel like I'm not cared for and I'm not as important because I was only one number and they needed 100 numbers. And so like there was one time where we went to a speak at a parish event, and the priest just like continually apologized. He was like, "I am so sorry. I really wanted more people to come and hear your message." And there was, I mean, it was a good amount. There were probably like 25. I'm fine with that. But I said to him, I was like, Father, we would come just for one. And he was like, "Oh, wow, that's really nice to hear," because he was so stressed that it wasn't enough people. And so I just feel like, I don't know, the spiritual is the practical. It should be focused on like an intentional prayer life internally for us as the people in ministry and working in this profession, but also like our focus should be on a soul, not on like the mass number of people we're bringing in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think in general, I like that image of a cup that overflows,
Yeah.
right? Um, the soul of the apostolate, this idea that the interior life is the most important element of any apostolate. If there's no interior life, then God the Father actually owes it to his son to end your ministry, right? He says it, the author says that along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but you need to first be filled. And if that's the image, you think about a cup, right? A big goblet that's being filled. The overflow is actually just a small portion of what's actually inside the cup,
Yeah.
right? So that's that 90-10 in my mind.
Mhm.
But I do think there's a practical need to look at it. Look, if you've got a parish with 800 families, right? And you are running a youth ministry and 2 kids are showing up out of
Mm.
if every, of the 800 families has the average 2.5 kids or whatever, that should still be 1,600 kids that are there. And I'm not saying those kids aren't important, but there's probably a need to reassess how you're doing the ministry. So
Yes.
when
Yeah.
I think about the practical, it's less about the numbers. It's less about
Yeah.
the numbers, but it's more about, okay, think about the actual ministry you've been called into here, that you've been hired for, that me as a tithing parishioner is paying you for. So I think there's a need to think still practically about
Yeah.
it and how you offer that. Even the focus model of, um, you've got one person ministering to three, and then those three minister to three, and pretty soon you've got, you know, this
Yeah.
giant tree of interconnected people from that one. That's still a numbers ministry. So I think
Yeah.
there is just a need to have both of those elements in mind,
That's a good
keeping in mind. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say that's a really good clarification. It's like you do need to know it, but it's when it's like so much is placed on it that it becomes, okay, now this is what matters and this is what I feel like I have to justify my job with. Because I think there
Mhm.
is like from a business standpoint, you are absolutely right. Like we can't just throw something at the wall, see what sticks. Like that can't be our mentality. If only 2 people out of 800 families are coming to this ministry, like that's not the food that they are hungry for. So I fully agree with you on that. I think I'm coming at it from like a place of, okay, we can't internally approach it like this is what matters. It's like the heart and the soul of the person or the people in front of you that matters.
Absolutely. It's got to be connected to Jesus, flowing from Jesus, and returning to Jesus
Yeah.
at the end of the day. That absolutely has to be all part of it. And all those pieces need to be ordered under that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. hmm
Yeah.
So, what are some places you see ministry being done well?
You got to take off my soapbox button. I was done now.
Oh,
No,
sorry,
just
sorry.
kidding.
Yep, yep,
No, just
absolutely.
kidding. Okay, places that being done well. Well, so like I said, I worked for the diocese, and so I want to actually highlight a parish in our diocese. I think that her name's Emily. She is the DRE for St. John Paul II Parish in Carroll, Iowa, and I think that she is doing a wonderful job. I think she's actually the story I mentioned at the beginning where she's like, I really want to bring this program, but like, I don't think we're ready for it. And she paused and kind of reassessed and went back. But I think she is approaching the ministry that she's doing. And she's not alone. She has a very, very supportive team of volunteers, of parents, and the priests are all on the same page with her as well. But I think she is very beautifully leading looking at ministry from a very holistic place of I want to reach kids, I want to bring the parents in, I want to feed the parents not strictly for the purpose of giving it to their kids, but also to like feed them and their needs. And I just feel like she models the patience and the spiritual side that is so needed in this work. Fred always says you have to have a strong enough faith when you work in ministry not to lose your faith, and I think she models that very beautifully and like rooting everything in her own prayer life and in going to mass. It's a very discerning role that she is taken on for Carol, and it shows in just the plan that her and her team have laid out and the process that they're taking. So I think they're doing a very good job.
Was she involved in the Turn Youth Conference at all?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
Not primarily. She wasn't the main person planning
Sure,
it, but she
sure.
might have been there.
Okay, okay.
I also
Well,
say, if I can, I'll point out one more.
yeah.
I think you guys had Father Barron on here, but the Augustine Indian Mission, I think in Winnebago and their connecting parishes, I think they do a beautiful job. And specifically, I want to point out Father Barron because I have noticed in several like in-person meetings and video meetings with him, he just has a very pastoral heart. And I've only encountered a few priests where it's like just so evident on their face and how they interact with people. So much so that like when we start a meeting, he leads us all in prayer, and it's usually a like a lectio of a prayer that he read or a scripture passage, and he's like, what does that speak to you guys? So he's very intentionally trying to even, be invited into people's prayer life and their own heart so that he can better minister to them. So I feel like from a priest standpoint or the leadership of a parish, just that pastoral heart, I think, can really be transformative.
Yeah, he's a rock star. He's on fire.
Yeah, yeah.
He's on absolute fire, and you can see it. He's got this what sounds like an impossible task. He's got 11 parishes
Isn't
that
that
he's in charge
crazy?
of. Yeah, and I think he might have a pastoral assistant, but he's losing them soon. It's just it seems so impossible, but he's so upbeat about it. Like it
Yeah,
hasn't beaten him down, right? He hasn't lost his faith over it, and
yeah,
he's just on fire. He's like, okay, we got all this territory that we can cover, and we're going to evangelize them. We're
yeah.
gonna
I love
evangelize him.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. He is somebody that everybody should listen to.
Yes,
Everybody should have 10 minutes with just to get kinda built up and get a little bit of their fire stoked into flame again. He really
yeah.
does have that personality, that presence about him. I love it.
I think the first time that we ever met with him, it was for a specific purpose for the meeting, but like the first half hour was like, tell us about yourself. Where did you guys come from? What are you doing? And it was just like nobody has ever done that in a professional business meeting. And that was just like, oh wow, this is really beautiful. Thank you for caring. Like, cause usually it's like we're coming in and we're trying to minister and like that's our role. But he just like flipped it. And it was actually very like beautifully shocking. It was awesome.
Yeah. I do like that. I get so sick of roses and thorns.
Yeah.
It's like or
Yeah.
happies and
Listen,
crappies or what.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just let's just have a conversation.
That's such a youth minister thing. Like,
I know.
yeah.
I love that. All right, one more big question for you, probably the most important question. All
Okay.
right, if you had the attention of the whole world for 90 seconds, what would you say?
That's a very good question. I think I would okay, here's what I'd say. I'm gonna try and make it like an elevator, an elevator speech. No, I'm just kidding. I would tell them that you have a purpose. I think so often if you are working in ministry professionally or if you are just somebody who is like strong in your faith, I have encountered so many people who are like, I love Jesus, but how the heck is he supposed to use me? Or I don't know what I'm supposed to do, or I don't know my purpose in evangelizing or sharing. And like this happened where we met a wonderful woman doing a ministry retreat, and she had lost her leg. Her elderly mom was the one taking care of her, and she felt that very much. She's like, I love God so much, but like, how the heck is he going to use me? I don't even feel like I'm worth, giving anything to anybody. And so I would say just like um, re-encouraging people that you have a purpose. God wants to use you, and it is such a specific way that he wants to use you because he's created you to love in only the way that you can love in this world. And that might be encountering one person, and it might, speaking to thousands and thousands. But either way, it's God's plan for you. And we just have to trust him, and it's going to be beautiful.
Amen. Great advice. Yeah, I see so many people that it's what's that Ralph Waldo Emerson old quote, like most men lead lives of quiet desperation.
I've never heard that one.
And I might even have the author wrong, but it's like an old like stoic kind of quote.
Yeah.
And the idea being that most people are just kind of quietly desperate in their lives, like they're unhappy, they're not
Mhm.
fulfilled. And in my mind, I mean, obviously Jesus is the answer to that, but I do think one big stepping stone for people is to re-engage with the life that they're living. Like
Yeah.
be just to be radically present, radically intentional with their time to realize that even like as simple as truly being present to your kids.
Yeah.
The ones that actively drive you nuts every moment of every day. When you
Yep.
actually meet them in the crazy though, there's joy there.
Yeah.
When you actually enter into it instead of trying to um, manage it, mitigate it,
Mhm.
whatever it might
Mhm.
be. And there's a real answer to that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and not just going to the kids, like, not just joy for you, you're like, "Oh, yes, we're getting
Yeah.
along, like, things are good," but joy for
Mhm.
the child. I see so many times on, like, the face of my daughter when it's moments where we get to, like, engage, or if it's just us, where it's just, like, you just see, like, pure joy and pure love and trust in that moment. So, yeah, there's a lot of beauty that we can find in everyday tasks or everyday experiences that I think we just pass over.
I have a moment that makes me think of specifically. I think I was sending an email, or I must have been sending an email, or what it was, from my phone, and my son was like, "Dad, Dad, Dad," and I'm like, "Just hold on, just hold on." And he goes, "Dad, put your phone down." and I, and I really like it was like this. It just like cut me through to my heart like a knife, and I was just like, "Oh,
Yeah.
my son needs his dad. Like, my
Yeah.
son needs his dad." And I was just like, I don't need to send this email right now, but my son is right there. And it just like flipped the switch for me, like this thing that's so obvious and so true. But that was the moment I started getting really intentional with where I put my phone, where I leave it, when I carry it
Yeah.
with me, especially at home. I just want to be radically present to my family. And
Yeah.
so just
That's so
it
good.
instead of trying to think about where I can fit work in, it's more like how can I design my day in a time where I just don't need to have my phone on me all the time, and it just, like,
Yeah.
really changed that for me.
That's a good
Well,
practice.
yeah, so, Kara, this has been a great conversation, and just thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere that our listeners can go to connect with you or support the ministry that you're doing?
Sure, yes, we have a couple places. So, our main website is www.drawnear.me instead of .com. And on there we have several podcasts. We host 2 technically, but it's Draw Near is our main podcast, and then we host a Eucharistic podcast since it's the Eucharistic Congress, and that one's called My Lord and My God. You can find all of those on our website. We also have a blog, and that's where you can go to support us. There's a button in the corner to support. You can probably find our Draw Near podcast on most of your listening platforms if you have Spotify or something like that. And then one other resource I guess I will share that Fred and I actually run. It's called IceaMovement.com. And it comes from, I don't know if he shared, but it comes from a word that he really heard the Lord speak about kind of where we're at in the church and the world. And those were the primary words that it began with was I see a movement. And in there, we have blog posts, video posts, resources that you can download, and soon to be courses that are really for the average Catholic just wanting to know more and growing in their faith, all the way to ministry professionals who want to know how to apply certain things in a practical way. So that's icamovement.com. And it's free to subscribe, or if you want some of the paid content, it's like $5 a month. So
Alright, sounds good. Kara, thank you for being on the podcast.
yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And thank you, dear listeners, for listening to the Catholic Ministry Professionals podcast. If you want to transform your parish through your work, but you're not sure where to start, you can download our free parish health assessment at catholicministryprofessionals.com/free assessment. It's just 36 questions. It only takes about 5 minutes to fill out. And afterward, you will have a color-coded picture of your parish's health that you can use to fuel better conversations, prioritize better work, and become a better leader. You can email us at catholicminpros@gmail.com to share feedback or request a free consultation. And finally, Don't forget to text this episode to a friend or a priest in ministry that can benefit from it. And with that, we'll see you in the vineyard.